Hello, welcome back to my haunted library. It's Regina. It's starting to feel like winter outside. The sky is black and churning, and it's definitely putting me in the mood to read melodrama. So today I'm here with a review of one of my favorite authors, and that's V.C. Andrews. Now, she didn't write this entire series because she died at a relatively young age in her early 60s of cancer. And Andrew Niederman actually ghost wrote the rest of this series. I don't know if Flowers in the Attic came first before My Sweet Audrina, but it was like the first big book that she came out with. Huge hit, and it spawned all these other books. So this one that I'm talking about, this series, is the Casteel series, which is the second series, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So instead of doing the individual books, I thought I would just do kind of an overview of the whole series. And yes, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't read them and you want to, I will be giving away major plot points, so just a warning. So back in May, I did a little quick review of Heaven, the first book in the Casteel series, which I loved and still love. And Batilda and I got so inspired by it, we did a rendition of Fancy by Reba McEntire, and you can see that. I'll link that one below. It's pretty fun. So I finished the first two a few months ago, and then I just read the last three just in this last week, pretty much, the last 2 weeks. So starting at the beginning with Heaven, this book I just loved. Because I think because V.C. Andrews was from Virginia, I feel like she really understands that environment and those people. My husband's actually his family's from like that part of Southwest Virginia, and they go really far back, and from like the 1600s. And it's mostly like Scottish, Irish, French, English families that have been here forever, mixed with Native American. So all of the stuff that she mentions in this book, I felt was very authentic. So that I really loved. And yes, this is high melodrama, so you're getting, the grandma and the baby die in the same chapter kind of thing. It's just one tragedy after another, but it's great. It really just is wonderful. It really hits my sweet spot of high camp, but also very moving, if that makes sense. So the main character, Heaven, is a young girl who lives, a child when it starts, who lives in a very poor section of West Virginia known as the Willies. So these are like hillbillies. And they are dirt poor, large families. Everyone lives in the shack, and it's very, they're hungry. It's freezing in the winter, and it's a very hard life. And the people in the town, Winter Row, really look down on them as being like hillbilly trash and all this stuff. So she is really suffering because her father, Luke, completely rejects her, and she doesn't understand why. And one day her grandmother takes her to her mother's grave and shows her this grave in the woods, and the grave is called Angel, for a woman named Angel. She said, that was your real mother. Sarah, this woman who's Luke's wife, who's, a stressed out harridan who's, pregnant and miserable and trying to keep, the family together while Luke is off, drinking corn liquor and gallivanting around, is not your real mother. This was your mother. And she shows her a suitcase, and inside is this beautiful, stunning, like porcelain doll with blonde hair, cornflower blue eyes, and dressed in her wedding dress. And then there's a beautiful wedding gown in there too that's really exquisite. And the grandmother says to her, this is your mother. These were your people. One thing leads to another. Things get really bad in the Casteel house. Baby dies. Grandma dies. Sarah runs off, and now Luke is stuck raising all these kids. He doesn't want them, and he's miserable. He's just a miserable bastard who leaves them for weeks on end, and they're starving. Heaven does have one friend in town, Logan. He is from a wealthier family, upper middle class. They own a drugstore, and his mother doesn't want him associating with the likes of the Willies. But Heaven and Logan are kind of like early love, they're kids, but they're boyfriend and girlfriend kind of. And one of my favorite characters that I love to hate, but I just think that she's great, is Fanny, one of the younger siblings who's not just a flirt. I mean, she's sort of certifiably a nymphomaniac. even as a kid. She's like, hooking up with the boys underneath the school cloakroom and exposing herself. And this is all done with, there's a sense of tragedy, of course, about this because she's so starved for love that she's acting out this way. And she continues to do so through her life, and it's a great character. And a real character. I mean, this happens. Things go really bad. Luke decides that he's going to sell off the kids, and this is very shocking in the book. Sell off the kids to like the highest bidder. Fanny gets sold to the reverend in town, who's a real perv. There's a lot of pervs in the series, just like in Flowers in the Attic. The adults in these books are very terrible people. I mean, the mothers are bad in their own way. The fathers are bad in their own way. And, there's not a lot of like good parental role models in this series. So Fanny goes to the Reverend. He's asleep. She can kind of guess what happens. And Heaven gets sold to this very strange couple. She is abused by this woman named Kitty, who's this very, very ostentatious woman. Kitty was in love with Luke, who rejected her. So the next best thing is she's going to like be a mother to his daughter, Heaven. It's a real mess. She has like OCD. She makes her like, there's a lot of like bathtub scenes where something must have happened to VC Andrews in a bathtub, because there's so many scenes where someone is being like abused in a bathtub. And not only is Kitty abusing her, but Cal, her husband, who's younger but still an adult, seduces Heaven. They have this illicit affair. Logan finds out, I think she confesses, and they kind of go their separate ways at the end of the book. So then we get to the next book in the series, and that's Dark Angel. Now, Heaven is a little older. She's a teenager, and she goes to live with her real mother's family. So Heaven arrives at Farthie thinking that she's going to have this great life with her real family, her real grandmother, Jillian. But Jillian, who's this incredibly well-preserved, beautiful blonde woman, doesn't want anyone to know she's old enough to be a grandmother. And she really just, she's even vainer than Corinne in the Dollenganger series, if you can imagine that. She really just spends her whole day in her bedroom doing her beauty routine and applying her salves and creams. And she really doesn't have a lot of interest in Heaven. But the father, stepfather, whatever you want to call him, Tony, does have an interest in Heaven, a very creepy interest. So you can kind of imagine, I love this, as you can see illustrated here. He's skulking around, and he is a character you will see throughout the rest of the books in this series. So Tony starts to control her life. She gets sent to this prestigious girls' school, and the girls are really mean to her. They put a laxative in her punch during the school dance, and there's a major accident that happens, and she does get her revenge, but it kind of reminds me of when little Carrie goes to the girls' school and gets beat up. So we're dealing with like Jane Eyre territory, but with laxatives, and it's kind of funny. So Tony buys her all these clothes, but they're very like old-fashioned. Actually, I love the way the clothes are described in this book because I love old-fashioned styles like classics, and I was just drooling over the description of her clothes. So one day, Heaven is exploring the hedge maze, like a garden maze on the estate, and gets lost. She manages to come out the other side, and she discovers this little cottage, this quaint little cottage, where this young man named Troy lives. He is the artisan who creates the toys for the Tatterton Toy Company. So Heaven and Troy fall in love. She's much too young for him, but in these books, that never seems to matter. And he's this very kind of tragic figure. In fact, I found him really annoying. He was not my favorite character. He's very like depressed and, I guess he's supposed to be like Byronic, but not in a good way. And I think it's Tony who tells her that Tony is actually her father, which makes Troy, who's Tony's brother, her uncle. So they have a forbidden love that it can't work. So there's a lot of stuff about Fanny too. She's living with a reverend and his wife. He gets her pregnant and buys her baby, like pays her off, and now she runs off and becomes a prostitute. She wants Heaven to use her money now because she has all this money with the Tatterton family to buy her baby back, but Heaven doesn't want to because she knows that Fanny is a mess. So we have this a lot of tension between these two characters. There's this subplot where Heaven wants to get revenge on the father that she knew growing up, Luke. She goes to try to freak him out by dressing up as Angel. And there's this ridiculous scene where, because she distracts him, this lion attacks and kills her brother. I was watching the Lifetime movie, and that scene I laughed so hard because I can't remember the brother's name, and I feel terrible. I'm going to write it here, but he's not that big of a character, but he's like dressed as a clown, and then he gets like half his face like torn off by the lion. So he's got like this sad clown killed by the lion. I mean, it's so over the top. I just died laughing, but in the best way possible. Like that place where laughter and tears merge. That's the sweet spot that these books hit for me, and I love it. So then we come to the third book in this series, and that's called Fallen Hearts. This one was started by V.C. Andrews. She passed away. It was finished by Andrew Niederman, who wrote the rest of the series. I really like this one a lot. Troy's dead. She gets back with Logan. They make up. They fall in love. She's going to just become a simple school teacher and live out her days married to Logan, teaching at the school while Logan runs his family business. Sounds great. Only problem is she's not quite feeling the passion with Logan that she felt with Troy. She's decided to just go ahead and do it. Everything's going great until Tony decides that he's going to throw a big wedding party for them at Farthingale. So she's reluctant, but I don't know. Okay, I guess we'll do it. Logan's excited about it. Once they get there, Tony starts to work his machinations to seduce Logan by offering him this big business opportunity by opening a toy factory in Winterow. And it kind of sweetens the deal for Heaven too, because this is a way she can really help the people of the Willies by providing jobs for all the wonderful artisans who work in the hills. So she goes for it. So they set up start to build this toy factory in Winterow. She stays on at Farthingale for a while Logan goes back to Winterow. But Fanny makes a visit to him. Heaven actually walks in on Fanny wearing just a towel, and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And Fanny gets really out of control in this book. She ends up seducing Logan and getting pregnant with his child, which you think that's horrible. But at the same time, in fact, before this even happened, or maybe it could have happened the same night, Heaven discovers that Troy is not really dead. He's actually living back at the cottage. He faked his own death, but now he's back. They hook up. Now, Heaven's pretty hypocritical because she's very upset that Logan and Fanny hooked up, but she doesn't seem to realize that she did the same thing with Troy. But in her mind, it's justified because it's like a special spiritual love, where Fanny and Logan, it was just lust. But whatever. They both get pregnant, Fanny and Heaven at the same time. Fanny gets pregnant with Heaven's husband's child, Logan, and Heaven gets pregnant with Troy's child, but Logan doesn't know that. So then Luke and his new wife, are killed in a car accident. They have a son named Drake, and Heaven wants to take custody of Drake, even though they're not really related. Fanny kind of kidnaps him, and then the book ends with this big courtroom drama where the two sisters are fighting for custody over Drake, and all the dirt spills out. The fact that Logan is Fanny's pregnant with Logan's child, the fact that the Reverend, really he raped her, let's call it what it is. And somehow, because he, admits before his entire town and congregation that, it was the lust of this young woman that made me that pierce the armor of my faith, I think is how he puts it. And the town, are on his side, which is, I mean, I guess it was a different time, but I don't think there would be that response today. And in the end, Heaven ends up paying her off to get Drake back. She gives her $1 million. And at first, Fanny's like, no, I won't. And then it was like, yeah, I'll take the money. So it ends with the sisters kind of, reconciling. They each have their babies. Fanny has a little boy named Luke. Heaven has a little girl named Annie. And at the end of the book, there's a package delivered from Troy to commemorate Annie's birth, which is a little miniature cottage with a little miniature Heaven and Troy inside playing Chopin, and Heaven understands what it means. So that is the end of Fallen Hearts. I really like this one. This is one of my favorites of the series. The next one, this was kind of an interesting book in the series, and at first I didn't really like it as much, but it did grow on me, and that's Gates of Paradise. Now, why it threw me is I'm reading the back before I started the book, and I expected to be more about Heaven and Logan, and it says, the car crash that killed Heaven and Logan. And I'm like, what? Like, I wasn't ready for that. The car crash that killed Heaven and Logan left Annie Casteel Stonewall orphaned and crippled. I wasn't prepared for this because I really loved Heaven. So I felt a little bit like kind of angry at this book starting off, but it did really grow on me. So Annie is her daughter, which is Troy's child with Heaven. She is in the car accident too. Well, first of all, Fanny has some wild party. It's like a big hoedown for her 40th birthday, I think it is. And the kids have gotten older. Luke and Annie are really abnormally close, of course. Fanny gets drunk and she's throwing herself on Logan. Heaven's mad. It's the same old story. She's like, we have to leave. Logan's too drunk to drive. They get into a car accident and are killed. And Annie, who is young, like a teenager, ends up in a wheelchair. So now we have another trope that we see with V.C. Andrews' novels about characters being in wheelchairs. And I think that this is interesting because, every one of these characters, especially the ones who are at Farthie, are trapped. And sometimes it's a poor cage and sometimes it's a gilded cage, but they're all in cages and they're being controlled by the adults, whether it's the Dollanganger kids or in this series. So I think there's something about that is very, of course it's melodrama, but it's also very moving. So as Annie, basically this story is about her living at Farthingale and Tony becoming increasingly creepy with her. His obsession with going back to Lee and then Heaven and now Annie. He goes through the same thing with her, makes her dye her hair blonde so she looks like Lee. So where Heaven was able to break away from Tony because Annie is disabled, she is trapped. And there's this great Nurse Ratched character, again, who gives her a bath, like a torturous bath. The thing with the bath is really kind of crazy. I really liked that character. I liked the gothic aspect of the almost like a Mrs. Danvers character. When she leaves, when the nurse gets fired, I felt like the story sagged a bit. So Tony is kind of a mess, and Farthingale's gotten really dilapidated. He's living in his own world. He's drunk half the time. He tries to get really sleazy with Annie. He wants to keep her in the wheelchair because he wants to control her, but she actually can walk. She is actually in love with Luke, but of course they can't get together because they're related, but she finds out, you know what, we're not related. So it does kind of have a happy ending with Luke and Annie getting together. Finally, something nice happens. So are you still with me? So then the final one, Web of Dreams. I just finished this one last night, and I have to say, I was really moved by this one. I thought this was a great story. This one does kind of like what Seeds of Yesterday does, where it goes back to the beginning. But in the Dollanganger series, at least we have some sympathy for like Olivia, the grandmother. This, we don't gain any sympathy about, at least I didn't, of Tony and Jillian, because they're even worse in this story. This goes back to Lee's story, Jillian's daughter. I'm not going to tell the whole story. It's a very involved history, but she ends up living at Farthingale with Jillian, who marries Tony, who's 20 years or so her junior. Her real father, well, who she thinks is her real father, is a shipbuilder, and I don't know, his character is kind of it's interesting, but it's involved. Of course, Tony starts getting very sleazy with her. I was really kind of shocked at the depth of his depravity in this book. It begins with him using her as an artist model, a nude model, when she's like 12 or 13. And it progresses into him actually molesting her twice, raping her, and she gets pregnant with Heaven. And Jillian is just horrible. She kind of puts her daughter, she doesn't want to have sex with Tony basically because it wears her out and it robs her of her youthful essence, according to her. So she kind of pushes her own daughter into this relationship with Tony. But there's no relationship. Like, he forces himself on her. And no one believes her. She's a very sympathetic character, Lee. In fact, I think of the entire series, she is the most sympathetic. So in order to escape Farthie, she leaves with just the clothes on her back and her doll, Angel, the portrait doll. And it becomes a very tragic symbol. And she doesn't have much money. She's trying to get to her grandmother, Jillian's mother. If she had made it to Texas and found the grandmother, she would have been okay. But instead, she runs into Luke Casteel, and then we know what's going to happen. And I was really sad when they went to the circus and they were trying to get her back to her train. It really builds the suspense up because you know she's going to miss that train, but you also know if she made that train, she probably would have been okay. She probably would have lived because even though she was pregnant, the grandmother had money. She would have, had been in a hospital and not in some shack in the Willies having her baby and dying from complications. You see a different side of Luke here, outhouse, which I thought was really touching. She lives in the shack. So she goes from this extremely wealthy life to living in this horrible conditions, but she's happier. She likes, Ma and Pa and Luke, even though he, likes his beer and moonshine, he does love her. But we know how it ends, and it's a tragedy. So the ending is basically Lee, or Angel, as Luke called her, dying. And this is kind of bookended with Annie finding Lee's diary. It doesn't really read like a diary at all. In fact, I forgot that it was a diary until it got to the end, and it was like, oh, let's put the diary away. So there is a sense that at least Annie and Luke have had a happy life. Whew, I've talked a lot, and I just skimmed the surface of the series. I did check out some of the Lifetime movies, and I really enjoyed them. At first, I was a little thrown by the actress they chose to play Heaven because of the red hair, and I didn't really see her that way, but I really loved her. She really grew on me. I thought her acting was great. I loved Jason Priestley as Tony, and I noticed that he directed at least the last one I watched. I watched the first three, so I just finished Fallen Hearts, but I will watch the rest and maybe do a quick review about that. Farthingale reminded me of an estate that had been turned into like a corporate center or something. It just had that look. And then they would have like the dolls kind of placed around, but they looked really cheap. It looked like those dolls you can buy at the thrift store. And the little cottage that Troy made at the end is really, really something like, no offense to the prop person, but looks like they went to Michael's the night before and with some hot glue and put this thing together. It wasn't the like exquisite toy that Troy made. Anyway, I'm just nitpicking, but I really enjoyed it. It's a fun, guilty pleasure. Of course, it doesn't quite match the depth of the books, but I enjoyed it. So I'm going to continue with my V.C. Andrews adventure, and the next one I'm going to read is Dawn. This one looks like it fell in the bathtub. Maybe someone was being attacked in the bathtub. I mean, there's probably a bathtub scene in this series. Now, I know V.C. Andrews did not write this, and it was, I believe, Andrew Niederman, but I'm looking forward to it. So if you have read the Casteel series or watched the Lifetime movies, let me know what you think in the comments below. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for stopping by my haunted library, and I'll see you soon. Bye.